Is The Great Race a hilarious look at racing back in 1908, or is it super long and make you want to speed things up? Find out today on Really Old Movies. Welcome to Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin, and today I'll be discussing the Blake Edward classic, The Great Race from 1965. So, some essential movie details. This was one of the most expensive comedy films at the time, coming in at around $12 million dollars and only grossing $25 million dollars. So it wasn't a major success financially. The story is based on the real 1908 New York to Paris race, and this movie would later on inspire wacky races from Hanna-Barbera. Now let's get into the plot. The basic plot: the Great Leslie, played by Tony Curtis, and Professor Fate, played by Jack Lemmon, they're competitors in daredevil competitions. Professor Fate always ends up coming short with disastrous results. He has great ideas, very ambitious ideas, but he just can't execute them properly. They decide that the greatest challenge for each other would be to race around the world from New York City, traveling westward all the way up to Alaska, then through the Siberian tundra all the way to Paris, France. Now, Maggie Dubois, played by Natalie Wood, she's a suffragette who also joins the race as a competitor and as a reporter for the New York's best paper, The Chronicle. Throughout their journey, they encounter an Old West town, almost freeze to death on a block of ice in the North Pacific, get captured and end up in a royal coup, and barely make it towards the Eiffel Tower where the race eventually ends. So yeah, that's the basic plot overall for The Great Race. Now let's get into my review. The plot itself, I gave a 4.5 out of 5. That was a great storyline. Loved all the different settings and different scenarios that the characters go through. It almost feels like like an anthology film. I do think the sequence in Carpania, which is the fictitious country they go to in Europe, that takes a good 45 minutes of the movie, and I think that was way too long. It could have been cut down significantly. I mean, the movie clocks in around 2 hours and 40 minutes, almost 3 hours, and you could definitely feel it. But it wasn't the worst. I really liked the characters, especially the relationship between Leslie, played by Tony Curtis, and Maggie, played by Natalie Wood. And I thought Professor Fate, played by Jack Lemmon, and Max, played by Peter Falk, I thought they were hilarious. I thought they were definitely the comedic relief of the film. So that brings it to acting. Overall, I gave it a 5 out of 5. I thought it was amazing. I loved it. I normally don't like Jack Lemmon, but he's absolutely hilarious in this role. And he plays two roles. He plays the role of the prince, who's a total drunk and absolutely ridiculous, very flamboyant, and then Professor Fate, who's really strict and straightforward, but he's just totally disastrous. And I also love it that there's a scene where they switch, so they put the prince into jail and have Professor Fate dress as him, because it's the same actor, so they look alike. And I love Professor Fate pretending to be the prince. It's just hilarious. And another layer added on to Jack Lemmon's abilities where he's imitating his own imitation. I thought that was hilarious. I thought Tony Curtis and Natalie Wood, they were funny together, but I really think Jack Lemmon is the best one. Tony and Natalie, they were funny, but they're definitely the more, serious roles. Kind of like you normally see in a movie where the hero, he's kind of the boring characters, the supporting cast, and the villains that you really like. And that's definitely the case in this movie. I also was very impressed with Peter Falk. You don't typically see him in movies like this. He's usually in more serious roles like Columbo and all of those. So it was funny seeing him as being an assistant. He was just as funny too. And I thought that was really awesome. Now, in regards to directing, I gave it a 3 out of 5. Blake Edwards did okay, but I really think he could have cut a good 45 minutes out of the movie. I don't think it needs to be almost 3 hours long. I really don't. And you could really feel it once we're in Carpania. It's really long. In regards to cinematography, special effects, I gave it 4 out of 5. I thought it was great. I love the cars, especially Professor Fate's. His was amazing. And I love that they were able to drive it around when it was fully extended. That was really funny. It's like super tall, like 20 feet tall. They're able to drive it around. That was really cool. And I also love the pie scene. That's probably the most famous scene in this movie. Evidently, over 4,000 pies were used. That's just crazy. Everybody's just drenched in pie filling and whipped cream, except for Tony Curtis. I thought that was hilarious that he wasn't hit at all. I thought that was hilarious. And he actually does get hit, but just once in the face, and it's not that bad. It's from Maggie Dubois accidentally hitting him with it. So that was hilarious. Great special effects. Great cinematography. The reason why I don't give it a 5 is you could really tell in some scenes they were on a stage, such as when they're on the ice block. That looked really fake, unfortunately, and it was hard to like that. And there were some moments, and maybe it was just me, but the version I watched of the movie, some of the more practical effects like that, the film grain was just awful. It just looked really aged, really terrible. But then the other moments where there's not crazy special effects like that, it was fine. Like it looked normal. So I don't know if that's just over time they've aged poorly or because it's a different element to make the effects. I'm not sure, but they did not age very well visually. Now, in regards to music, I gave it a 5 out of 5. I thought it was great. It really brings you into the time period. There's an Old West song that I liked. It was pretty good. It really makes you feel like you're back in that era. I love the music for Dr. Fate and Max. It's hilarious. You can always tell something wrong is going to happen, and it's hilarious. So I thought it was great music. It was a great addition to the film. So overall, that brings my Letterboxd score to a 4.1 out of 5, which I'll round to a 4 out of 5. Great movie. I think it needs more love and praise. Just keep in mind it's almost 3 hours long. That may be what turns people away from it, but there's some great moments in it, and I highly recommend it for those great moments. All right, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Make sure to subscribe to our Instagram and Facebook at Really Old Movies, where I discuss behind-the-scenes details on the week's particular film. New podcasts will be released Saturdays at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. This has been Really Old Movies. I'm your host, Harrison Scullin. Take care.